Start. Perfect. Thank you for recording, Peter. So for everybody on and for the people that are joining, I want to take this moment to introduce myself. If you don't know me already, my name is Leslie Hugh. I am the unwilling founder of Pierce's Pledge. Pierce, my son, was murdered by his father with a gun on January the 13th, 2021. He was 9 years old when that happened. And I was in the middle of a court custody case. And so when this happened, obviously it was a complete utter destruction of my life. And obviously I'm still in deep grief over it. But what we've done in honor of Pierce is to start Pierce's Pledge. So Pierce's Pledge asks family law attorneys to ask their clients about weapons in their house, and if they have them, to store them off property, to make sure that we can safeguard our kids. So I do see a lot of amazing lawyers on this call right now who have signed the pledge. We're very grateful to you for that. I'm also very grateful for the SFPD for showing up here. This event started because at our first Pierce's Pledge meeting that we ever had at Nika Sharani's house, she's on this, we had a few mothers that came up to us to ask us questions about guns because we brought this issue to the forefront and we didn't know the answers. So I have a friend, Denise, whose sister is Commander Rachel Moran, who offered to put us in contact. And so that's how this conversation started. It's a conversation amongst gun experts and also parents. So I Megan?
For the second half of the year.
Okay, great. I would like to say that I have special thank you to the SFPD. I pray that none of you know what they truly do, because I found myself in a police room and I know that they have incredible amount of courage and kindness, and they were out in the scene in a really horrendous, graphic, terrible scene. And I am very grateful to all of you for what you do, and I thank you very much for serving and helping all of us. So anyways, with that, I will leave it to Cody Dougherty, who is our Pierce's Pledge gun expert. And so she will take over from here, and I'll leave it to you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Leslie. And I also want to reiterate how appreciative we are to have the SFPD here and how grateful we are for your service. I'm Cody Dougherty. I am a mom, a San Francisco resident, a lifelong friend of Leslie's, and I'm a volunteer at Pierce's Pledge, and I've become the firearm expert in-house and also the firearm storage lead for our organization. And I'll be moderating the meeting today. And we're very, very excited to have 4 panelists from the SFPD and 1 from Pierce's Pledge today joining us. And first, I want to introduce Commander Rachel Moran. Hello. And if you could just say a brief introduction about yourself, I would love that.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Rachel Moran. Been with San Francisco Police Department coming up on 30 years this January. And most importantly for this conversation, a mom.
Yep, absolutely. And we also have Acting Lieutenant Tony Flores. If you could quickly say something about yourself, Tony.
Sure. Tony Flores. I'm born and raised in the city and county of San Francisco. I still work here. I love it. And I've been here with the police department for 41 years, which I think everyone starts laughing because they all make fun of me being the senior guy here. But I also am a dad, and I have children that have actually witnessed gun violence when they were young. So, and again, Leslie, thank you for sharing your story. I do remember
yes,
about it. And again, my heart goes to you and everyone that's affected by this. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. And I also just want to remind everyone, if you could please make sure you're on mute. I also want to introduce acting Captain Sam Chris. If you could quickly say something about yourself.
Hi, my name is Sam Christ. I've been a police officer here for 28 years. I'm currently filling the acting captain position at community engagement, and we do a lot of activities throughout the community, dealing with young children all the way to adults and events. So that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. And I also would like to introduce Sergeant Pat Fay. If you could quickly say something about yourself.
Sure. My name is Pat Fay. I've been a police officer in San Francisco for about 14 years. Born and raised in the city. I have a 6-year-old daughter, an 8-year-old son. Prior to becoming a police officer, I spent 10 years as a Marine Corps infantry officer. So I've seen gun violence and the effects all over the world. I was part of my current job. I was also an investigator at Special Victims Unit. And now I'm assigned to the Crime Gun Investigation Center, investigating incidents with people, prohibited persons in possession of firearms, people in possession of firearms when they should not be in possession of firearms, shootings, and I also run the gun violence restraining order program for the San Francisco Police Department.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, our Pierce's Pledge consultant, Julia Weber. Julia is a mom also and a San Francisco resident. She is an attorney and a social worker who consults nationally on violence prevention. She's drafted and advocated for laws addressing gun violence prevention in California, and most recently successfully advocated for $40 million in state funding to support implementation of these policies statewide. Julia is a recognized expert on these issues and domestic violence, child custody, and family matters. And Julia has also worked as an attorney representing kids and regularly provides training for law enforcement and the courts and others. And we're extremely grateful to have her on our team. And I wanted to turn the mic to her and have her kind of introduce the landscape of firearms in the Bay Area from her perspective. And go ahead and take over, Julia.
Thank you, Cody. Thank you so much. And thank you, Leslie, for your courage and leadership in this area. And of course, thank you all from the San Francisco Police Department for being here today and for your expertise and work in this area. I've had the honor and privilege of working with the department over the years on a variety of issues, including addressing sexual assault prevention, domestic violence, and the gun violence prevention efforts, which obviously are so critical and important for our discussion today. So, you know, unfortunately, we've all become too familiar with the public health crisis around gun violence, including here in the Bay Area. This is, you know, gun ownership is prevalent across the United States. You've probably heard the statistic. There are more privately owned firearms than people in the United States. I work regularly with gun owners, responsible gun owners who support reasonable regulations that are designed to reduce risk. So we like to believe, and we know that most gun owners are responsible with how they store their firearms and use their firearms. What we are most concerned about are situations in which someone should not have a firearm, and of course, the use of firearms in situations that are dangerous and result in tragedies like we're talking about today and that we focus on with respect to Pierce's Pledge. So we have a couple of new reports in California that I think, you know, lend some really helpful context to why we're talking about this today. One of them was put out recently by Hope and Heal Foundation, which works across the state to address the public health aspects of gun violence. And in that report, you can look at gun-related homicides in great detail in terms of where they've occurred in the state. So it's an interactive map, and we can provide information about how to access that online after or in the chat. I can add that link. But that you can go down to the actual street and location of where these tragedies have occurred. And they've mapped this back to 2014, so over the last 9 years. And you can see that there are over 12,800 gun homicides in California over that time period. And they emphasize that there are clusters where this kind of homicide is occurring, and the two largest clusters are in the Los Angeles area and in the San Francisco Bay Area. And those counties include Alameda with 951 homicides, then Contra Costa, Santa Clara, and San Francisco's number 4 on that list with 287. So these, each of these are stories and lives that we think could be saved, deaths that could have been prevented. And the sort of other piece of information, so that's just a brief overview of that really extensive report, is an important report that's come out of our new California Office of Gun Violence Prevention, with my former colleague from Giffords Law Center, where I worked as implementation director. Ari and I work together now in our respective positions, me as a consultant and Ari, who's the new director at the Office of Gun Violence Prevention. They've just released a brand new report that has some really, I think, hopeful information as well, which is something that I try to emphasize in all my presentations, which is that policies and procedures, when implemented in this area, make a difference. And so the kind of work that SFPD is undertaking in the various aspects that are represented today, I think it's critical to know that there are things we can do and have done. So California has some of the most extensive policies addressing gun violence prevention in the country. And California's gun death rate is 43% below the rest of the country. We know our children are safer from gun violence than in most other states. Any life lost is too many lives lost. So that does not negate the reality, but we can do more across the country and even in California to prevent these kinds of tragic outcomes. So the way the report makes this even clearer is that if the gun rate in the rest of the US matched California's over the last 10 years or so, nearly 140,000 gun deaths could have been prevented, 140,000 people whose lives could have been saved. So there are 3 things we can do that I think we're going to be covering today. We can have critical conversations about firearm ownership and storage to discuss this openly with key stakeholders, including the physicians we work with, the families we interact with, and other folks in your orbit. We can develop an understanding about the availability of legal remedies, and we have a host of tools. We certainly have the gun violence restraining order, which is the narrowest important tool available to us, but we have firearm prohibitions in domestic violence restraining orders, civil harassment orders, workplace violence prevention orders, and of course in the criminal context as well. So there are legal remedies we can do. And then lastly, we can take concrete steps to prevent those who shouldn't have access to firearms, including those who may be in contentious child custody litigation, which is what we focus on, Pierce's pledge, those who are prohibited. That's sort of what we talk about as low-hanging fruit. There are folks who the state knows have at one time legally owned firearms, no longer should be owning those firearms, but still maintain access to them. And additionally, figuring out under what circumstances someone should become prohibited from owning or being able to purchase firearms going forward. So we can take some concrete steps to implement those policies. So I'm very pleased that, of course, Pierce's pledge is leading on in all of these areas, and that we have this chance to talk today. So thank you, Cody, for moderating, and happy to turn it over to you and others, and chime in as may be appropriate. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you, Julia. It was really informative. I want to tell the group, everyone on the call, that if you have any questions, to put them in the chat. And when we get to our Q&A portion, we will get through the questions to the best of our ability. And we have some some topics already formulated for our panel of experts from the SFPD. So I'm just going to jump right in. I think one of the number one questions that we really want to tackle is, how can parents initiate conversations about responsible gun ownership with other parents? And what are effective ways to approach this topic in our parent-to-parent relationships? Commander, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so this is kind of more coming from a mom perspective, right? As opposed to like, this isn't part of our general orders for the department. But what I've learned is that you just have to start a hard conversation. Like, you just have to say it, and your children are worth it. Like, they're just worth it. So it depends where you're coming from, and this topic, like, you're coming from the heart because you care about your child, you care about the parents that they're going to's house, right? The child's house that they're going to. So you just need to start the conversation, and I would be thoughtful on how you approach it. And I'll just give you an example. I do best like by scenarios, and I practice scenarios with my child. So like, if my daughter was going to a person's house that I didn't know, I would just be like, hey, I'm Rachel Moran, and this may be a very odd conversation, but I'm just concerned about guns in people's homes. It's just one of the things that's, it's impacted my life. So I just want to, find out if you would be willing to talk about it. If you have guns in your home, do you store them safely? And just what's your thought? And then hear what they have to say. And I think you really have to be ready, like if somebody's going to be like defensive about it, or how they react is very important for you to take cues on. But like, people have asked me that question, and I'm completely open because I have nothing to hide. I do have firearms, multiple firearms in my home, and I have no problem telling people, yes, like I carry a firearm when I'm not working and it's on my person. And when I'm home and not carrying my firearm, it's locked in my safe that the only people have combination to are myself and my husband. So like, in my opinion, there's no reason why somebody shouldn't be forthcoming. And it shows a place, I feel like it comes from a place of caring. It's not accusatory. You're not like toting NRA, or you're not anti-gun. You're just trying to go straight in the narrows with safety for your children. And I think the more conversations that are had, the more common that'll become. And that might even tip off that parent, like if their child's going to a different house, so maybe they'll have that conversation. So I think that the big key to this one is just start the conversation. And sometimes you're going to feel awkward and you may trip over it, but just start it. And so what if it doesn't go well? Then just don't that kid's house. You know what I mean? If that's how you feel, like, meet at the park, right? But you just have to start it. And I'm sure, like, as you ask it different times or come across questions, like, you'll get smoother. But that's just my opinion on that.
No, I really appreciate that. That's excellent feedback. Was there any of the other experts on this panel wanted to add something to what Rachel had to say?
Hey, it's Tony Flores. So I actually like to piggyback what the commander said. Also, it's that conversation that you have with your child, especially when they're going to go over a friend's house. I think Rachel hit it right on the point, is that, hey, who are you hanging out with? Who do that? And you need to have that open conversation before they would walk out the door. I'm always asking them, who are you going to be with, and who are they? And I've had my kids tell me before, hey, Dad, they have guns like you have guns, but and I say, okay, well, are they secured? And why do you know they have guns? That's usually my first thing is, why do you know that? And why are they talking about it so openly? But I'm okay with them talking about it, but it's that share information. I think for not as a dad, I never wanted it to be a mystery with my kids, especially because they knew this is the job that I have, and I will have a firearm. And like Rachel, she has multiple firearms. I have multiple firearms, that they're in the safe. And we'll talk about that a little bit later about that securing of that property. But I really think it's important that we just know not only who they socialize with, but just kind of remember that they need to have this conversation and know that they're not toys. I think that's the right off the bat, when they were young, when they were small, these are not toys. These are not, these can hurt people and they can hurt anybody around.
Thank you, Tony. That's really, really helpful. Was there anything else that our panelists wanted to add?
So I'll just
Sergeant?
add one more thing, just because
Mhm.
everybody's, most of us are used to Googling things and looking things up on the internet, and there's a lot of good stuff out there, also a lot of not the best stuff. There is, if you go to the California Department of Justice webpage, there's actually a Bureau of Firearms within the Cal DOJ, and they actually have a section on firearm safety. I printed it out. Sorry, my camera's trying to work my camera,
yeah.
but I can send the link out. It's very straightforward. But I mean, if you look at just the few topics they have,
Sergeant, you just muted. Pat,
my arm movements hit the keyboard. I'm sorry.
that's okay.
Guns and children, firearm owner responsibilities, rules for kids, methods of childproofing for your firearm. So if there was like a reference, I know sometimes we all struggle to find the right place to look at things.
Excellent.
If you were to look for a starting point to refer people to, the Cal DOJ Bureau of Firearms has a really good, at least an outline for a starting point of what to do around children.
Would you mind putting that link in the chat, Pat?
I'm going to give it my best effort to put the link in the chat, and we'll
Okay.
see how that goes. Give me just a sec. Sorry. I also have two screens going, so it looks like
That's
my eyes
okay.
are going back. Just so you know,
I can have our.
I can also add it. I'm happy to add it, Pat, too. It's not a problem. We can add that. And Cody, I'm gonna also put a link here to a one-pager PDF that has conversation starters from the Ask campaign, which is a campaign specifically designed to assist parents and family members in having conversations in this area. So this is a campaign that was developed by the Brady campaign, along with a group of pediatricians nationally. So I'm gonna just stick a link there to that PDF, and they have a website, more extensive information, but in case folks are thinking about specific conversation starters. Excellent.
My next question is, how can you tell if someone, let's say, if we're talking about the situation of like a play date, for example, and you're attending with your child, or you want to give your child advice, how can you tell if a person really is a responsible gun owner? What does a responsible gun owner look like? What are the appropriate ways to store a firearm in the home? And I'll leave that to the panelists, whoever wants to chime in.
I can go first on that. I think first and foremost, I think Tony kind of referenced it. Most kids probably shouldn't, if you're going over to visit someone's house, it shouldn't be readily apparent that there's a gun there. They shouldn't be, shouldn't be visible. They should be locked up. Among the guidelines recommended is the storage of, you've got the firearm with some kind of cable or safety lock through it, so it can't be used, and then that itself inside of another safe. So basically 2 safety mechanisms with ammunition stored in a separate locked safe, not with that one. So like I would, for me personally, if my kids were to go over to someone's house and they came back and told me, oh, I saw that so-and-so's dad had a gun, that would pop up an immediate red flag for me, that they really shouldn't see it, outside of maybe the dad's going hunting or something like that. He's leaving the house with it. Oh, I saw, he was leaving the house to go somewhere. So, maybe a little bit better, probably should have been locked up or in a bag or something like that. But at least that would, if they report seeing guns at the house, that would definitely give me something to probably look a little deeper into, maybe have a heart-to-heart with that parent, and kind of figure out what's going on and what were the circumstances.
Okay. Thank you, Pat. Tony?
Yeah, so about that security, about when you lock it up in a safe, that's what I do. But there's other measures to do. Again, the last thing you ever want to see is maybe somebody getting into your house. Maybe one of your kids' friends gets in the house. They find out that maybe that you have a firearm, but they actually get into the safe. Say you're not there for a while. Somehow, some way, they just get into the safe. Well, if you take those extra steps, measures to kind of I run a cable through it. So not only do I have it in the safe, but I run a cable through it and I lock that. So I know if they break the safe, they're not going to be able to grab it immediately. And so you want to kind of make sure those possible extra steps that are taken, but it's and those safe are there for a reason. They're there, so they're not supposed to be out in the open. I get all of us kind of like, okay, I want to get to my stuff quick, but there's also, you have to think about your family. There has to be a balance here. So the balance to me is always my children come first. And so that's going to be the balance in this whole thing. So again, how do you recognize it? Sometimes you can't even recognize it, but there's those little indicators, like maybe their dad, they had all these ammunition all over the place, but I didn't see a gun. And, or, they had these things set up that maybe, silhouettes that had, holes in them. And so that would be, so those little things that the indicator, even though you don't see you're like, okay, that's most likely. Again, that's that conversation that you have with your children about these things, these other paraphernalia of gun ownership that you might see.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, that's really, really great information. Thank you, Tony. And I for my team at Pierce's Pledge, I would hope someone could put the Project Child Safe link into the chat, where you can get a free firearm safety lock, a cable lock. There are locations in San Francisco and all over the country where you can pick up free safety kits for your firearms if you have firearms at home that need attention.
I'd be happy to do that, Cody. If you don't mind, can I just chime in here and just note that one of the things around safety that I just want to put out there is that if you don't already own firearms and maybe thinking about purchasing firearms, it's really important to understand that there's a lot of messaging out there that having firearms makes you safer. And in certain situations, that's not the case. We know that the presence of a firearm when there's domestic violence and other critical situations increases risk, but we're up against messaging that suggests that it makes one safer. So just the presence of a firearm, for example, whether you own it as someone who's experiencing intimate partner violence or the other person owns it, just the presence of the firearm, or someone else in the house owns it, the presence of the firearm increases the risk of a lethal outcome 500%. So we can't just assume that firearms always increase safety or are well utilized for self-protection. They can do enormous harm even when the intent is different. So think carefully if you're considering purchasing firearms or being in a home where there are firearms about whether your situation is one where the kind of safety that our officers and other firearm owners are sharing today, whether that's really available to you in your particular situation, because it may be more dangerous than protective.
So true. Thank you, Julia. And to sort of go from the topic that we were just discussing, I think it's a good time to discuss what or how we can talk to our children about firearms. How can we empower our children to understand more about firearms? How can we explain to them how to practice firearm safety? What do we say to them if they do encounter a firearm? And I'll turn this over to our panel. If any of you have input in that.
I'm just going to say right off the bat, the gun is always considered hot. In other words, it has the capability of discharging. And that's one of the things that I hammered into my children, because you think that it's empty just because you don't. And that's why we do these safety checks. You want to make sure that they understand that even though the magazine might be empty, but there might still be one in the hole in the pipe right there. So just because you think that it's safe, we do these triple checks to kind of make sure. For my kid, my daughter Monica, she actually wanted to be a hunter. She says, I want to go hunting, and at an early age too. And so I said, well, okay, well, you need to learn everything about this. And so they actually did all the research. They got out the booklet. They started educating themselves. By the end, and they actually passed the exam at the end, when they got their hunting license, they go, I don't want to do it. I go, okay, all right. They saw that what it was, but they wanted to see if they could do it. And so it's like, if you do, there are steps. There are definitely classes that should be taken. I think that's always the case. I truly believe that not just because you pass a test doesn't make you, just because you drive a car or you pass a test doesn't make you a great driver. It's going to take you a lot of practice. It's just like anything else. You want this person to have a lot of knowledge before they get behind the wheel of a car.
Yeah, absolutely. Was there any other additions to these questions that our panel wanted to add?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Pat. I'll go after you.
I would just say, like, part of it, like anything with children, the unknown or the forbidden, kids are drawn to, like anybody. They're drawn to it. They're curious. They don't know. When they see something that's forbidden, there's all sorts of things, different reactions that certainly wouldn't be logical to any of us that are a little bit older, more experienced. But for kids, they're curious. And I think Commander Moran brought it up earlier, just addressing things straight on, using plain language. Every kid is different. Everybody, parents know their kids better than others. And I've kind of always been again, this is my opinion. I've always kind of been of the opinion that if you address things directly, like Tony said, just talk about, hey, it doesn't matter if your friend says it's unloaded or somebody says it's unloaded. You shouldn't be touching a firearm unless, me as your father or your mother is there, obviously depending on the age of your kids and a bunch of other things, but kind of taking some of the mystery out of it and talking about it straightforward doesn't prevent everything, but it could potentially prevent the situation where, the one kid found a gun and they're passing it around, they're looking at it and they're playing with it because they think it's a toy. It doesn't matter if you think it's a toy or anything like that. You hear all those kind of stories and they're just horrific. But even if you think it's a toy, you should treat that as a real gun. And I think that's a good mindset to go through with it. And like I said, just being straightforward and being open about it. Again, that takes at least some of the mystery away, and hopefully it can just help give you that little bit of extra help there to prevent, a horrible tragedy.
Thank you. Commander Moran, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I'm total agreement about the mystery of things and knowing that obviously that in my profession and in my lifestyle and Gracie's father, that who's my daughter, that firearms were always going to be around. So when we felt it was age appropriate, we introduced her to firearms. We introduced her to safety of firearms. She shoots. She's probably more proficient at shooting a firearm than I am, and a variety of different firearms, just because that's part of our everyday life and in our home. Even though they're restricted from her, she's very familiar with them, as well as the damage that it could wreak. And so when I see a homicide in San Francisco or a homicide in Oakland, and she hears the news, like, we take the time and we discuss it and how dangerous firearms are and drive-by shootings and hitting the wrong person, right? Not the intended target who's a gangster, right? But innocent people, children getting killed, people in cars getting injured. So it's not just like a one time, it's a constant conversation. And one of the things that I've done with my daughter, and it's regarding sexual assaults, it's regarding drugs, and it's regarding guns, is I run scenarios with her. And it may sound strange, but I don't want her caught off guard if somebody says, hey, look at my dad's gun, and goes to hand it to her. So we have already practiced, like, hey, you know what, I'm not comfortable around that, put it down or I'm leaving. And then getting out of there. Like, same with, like, if she goes to a party and somebody says, here, do you want a joint? She'd be like, no, if that's what you want to do, that's fine, but I'm not into that. So she has a ready-made answer if she's caught off guard. And that's something that I've tried to instill in her. But it's just those constant conversations with your children about what they may encounter in the firearms. That's my tactic.
That's excellent advice. And you touched on something that I was gonna kind of ask about. You gave an example of what your daughter might say or do if she came across a firearm. Like, what do they do? Should they call their mom and dad or caregiver? Should they leave? Should they call 911? What do they do? What do you tell your child to do in the event that the firearm appears in front of them? What should they do?
Well, yeah, well, obviously, if it's used in a reckless manner, then my kid knows to call 911. They know, and to move to a safe location as they're making that call. That is probably especially if somebody's not thinking when they're holding this firearm, whatever firearm it is. So it's, as we said, it's not a toy. It's not something to be played around with. And so I think that's probably the most important thing, is if that's occurring. And I agree with Rachel. I agree with Pat. It's that conversation that you have with your children and say, hey, you're out of there. Just go. Or you let me know. I'll pick you up. No, I'm not going to ask you a lot of questions. I'm just going to pick you up. Here we go. And, then we'll have that conversation later on. And maybe down the road, if that child or another person is using that gun recklessly or everything, maybe that is a conversation that person needs to have, right? Maybe they don't understand what they did. Oh, let me show you this nice shiny thing. And you say, hey, you know what? We ain't doing that. We're not here to show off your toys, kind of thing. And they're not toys.
And there's a legal aspect too, like Pat, like juveniles should not be in possession of or touching firearms unless an adult's present, as far as I'm aware. Like Pat, if you could touch on that, or Attorney Weber. So there's a criminal aspect to that as well. If you guys would touch on that.
Either way, would you like to?
Yeah, go ahead, Pat.
Okay. So the bulk of my job, bulk of my cases are people who should not be in possession of firearms. Juveniles should not be in possession of firearms in a public place. I'm typically dealing with possession of firearms in a public place. Is kind of the bulk of what I deal with. They obviously should not. And then some of it comes back to, sometimes we've run into cases with kid brings it to school, not to do anything with it, but because it was left unsecured at the house. In which case, when we look at the laws under 25-100 of the California Penal Code, if the firearm in the house is accessible to a juvenile and they gain control of it, then the parent or the owner of the gun is obviously liable for that, as well as the juvenile who brought it out into a public place. There's there's repercussions under the criminal justice system for both of those scenarios, and depending on the full circumstances, probably for both of them instead of just one or the other. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and I would just add that's absolutely right. And there are very specific circumstances where a 16-year-old, for example, may be able to have access to a firearm with adult supervision for hunting. But other than that, we have significant restrictions on young people's ability to have any contact with a firearm. And what we sometimes see is the issue, as you mentioned, Pat, of inappropriate, sometimes illegal handling and storage of firearms. And we know that becomes an issue not only for risks around homicide, but also we've seen an increase in youth suicide, and unintentional shootings can result from that as well. So we're looking at a whole range of issues that I think are really important to consider. We also know that we have two types of laws in this area, both for child access prevention, or CAP laws, and safe storage laws. During the pandemic, UC Davis's research indicates that we saw an increase in new firearm purchases, people who had not previously owned firearms, and an increase in improper storage of firearms. More people keeping them out, unlocked, and loaded. That's really concerning. So when we talk about safe storage, that's what we're talking about, is ensuring that if you are a firearm owner, it's properly handled. Child access prevention laws get at what happens when a tragedy occurs because a young person got access to a firearm, and there are criminal consequences for that as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Julia. And in a couple minutes, we'll get to the questions in the chat. But I just wanted to quickly cover a little bit of the storage aspect. I just want to point out that Pierce's Pledge, we have a storage map in process on our website, locations you can store a firearm. And the city also has gun buyback programs that can be utilized. And United Players is a really useful avenue to access the gun buyback programs. But I know, Commander Moran, you said you had some gun buyback programs possibly in the pipeline. And then you also, I was hoping you would touch on the property for safekeeping sort of statute that you can implement.
I will.
Sure, I'm going to go ahead and direct Sam Christ, Acting Captain Sam Christ, regarding a portion of this, and then the other portion I would kick off to regarding like domestic violence and stuff to Tony and Pat.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, so I'll touch on the gun buyback program. So for 8 years, Sergeant Deanna McDonald from Southern Station has been doing a gun buyback program in coordination with the United Players, which is a nonprofit in the city, along with the Mothers Against Violence. What the United Players does, they go and get donations throughout the community to be able to afford to do the buyback program. And they'll list like an assault rifle will be $200 or whatever through that. And then the firearms are turned in. You know, we have police officers there. We have officers from the range to make sure we check the weapons, all that stuff, and secure them correctly. But they've been doing that for 8 years in conjunction with, like you said, the United Players. But there is a plan in work. He was talking through the DOJ to help speed this up so you can do multiple ones throughout the year, because as it stands now, the money it's come through donations. That's how they're able to get these funds to put these together. So like our next one right now is planned for December 9th of this year. That's when Southern Station is going to be doing that with those 2 nonprofits that I mentioned also. But I think there is plans in the work to try to have the DOJ have funds available so this can happen more often. So if there is discarded guns or guns people don't use, or, you know, they just don't have the need for them, they can turn them in instead of waiting, you know, for a standard period of time. So it happens regularly.
Thank you so much for that input. So helpful. And then to finish the other part of that question.
The property for safekeeping. So I'll touch on my shop, which is the domestic violence portion of it. So officers respond, and maybe possibly there's an incident where there is a firearm there. Possibly sometimes the officers will ask that, are there any firearms here? They'll say, yeah. And if, depending on the circumstances, not all cases are the same, but if there's an emergency protective order that is issued, then the officers will go ahead, seize that gun if possible, and then book it in for property for safekeeping. And it waits for the duration of the case. There's a possibility if the case is filed, in other words, it moved forward through the criminal justice system, that an order may be that they are no longer, they're banned to have that, or maybe a restraining order is issued at that time. But say the case is adjudicated, maybe it wasn't filed, and so this person wants their gun back, that we took it for property for safekeeping. Well, there's a process, there's a whole process that has to be done before they can get that gun back. One of them is that they have to get the seal, we call it the gold seal, from DOJ saying that they're all cleared. So they run them, they make sure there's no restraining orders, not only but all over. So it's not San Francisco based, but say maybe the victim or the person got a restraining order, maybe down south and so on. So it's something before we almost, it's like a triple check before you hand this firearm back to this individual. We don't give them the firearm and the bullets back simultaneously. There's a 2-tier process to this thing. It's one, you get one, then you leave. If the hard part sometimes is when they say, well, wait a minute, you booked 20 guns. I go, well, that's 20 trips that you're going to need to make here to get these guns back. And it's worked out fine for right now. But again, when people want to surrender these firearms, we, as the police department, we accept these firearms, give them a proper receipt, and then and actually, I think that's thrown to Pat's shop after that.
Yeah, I would just add.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I would just add to that. Sometimes they're, like Tony said, they're seized at the scene of a domestic violence incident. Sometimes people end up with some type of restraining order, civil restraining order, anything like that. Typically, when they get served with those, there's a period of time that they have to surrender the firearms. They can do it a couple different ways. I think as mentioned before, there's no gun dealerships in San Francisco, so sometimes people will have it stored, transferred to a gun dealership. But we can also do that here in the police department, and they would just have to either contact us, contact the police department. Officers would respond, like Tony said, and pick up the firearms just to get them out of the way immediately, because it's not easy. Even if people want to sell firearms, nothing's easy, nothing's quick. That's the quickest way. And then while they're in our possession, they can actually have those firearms legally I've seen them where, people are like, hey, you know what? I don't need to have any guns. This is too much. They can actually sell it to a dealer while it's still in SFPD custody. The Cal DOJ paperwork goes through, and then whatever that entity, person, dealership would then apply and get the gold seal letter, as long as they're eligible, and then they would be able to retrieve the firearm. So that takes, where we act as, more or less people that are just holding the firearms until it gets legally transferred away, just to get it for the quickest way possible to get the gun out of the house, away from that person. Because I think probably too often people maybe get a little bit confused, or they're intentionally confused, and I gave that to my brother to hold on to. It's like, no, you need to have it actually transferred. So while you're working on that, and while we get to run the background check on your brother, which you probably didn't do when you gave him your firearms to hold on to. It would stay with SFPD. They would do the application. The paperwork part to transfer it would take place. And then for them to get it, they would have to go through another Cal DOJ background check to get it from us, and then show up with the letter.
That's such helpful information. Thank you. Thank you so much. And if you want to know more about storage and other firearm, storage, needs, you can go to our website. And I want to wrap up the conversation just talking a little bit about the role that schools and educational institutions can play in promoting firearm safety awareness among students and parents. It's a big topic, and I know we don't have a lot of time, but Commander Moran, I felt like you had some really helpful things to say about schools and firearms when we talked before.
I'm going to go ahead and hand this off to Acting Captain Sam Chris, just because he's our community engagement expert, and they deal with the schools primarily. But if there's something that you want me to tap into that we had discussed prior, I'll be happy to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, so at community engagement, we used to run the school resource officer program out of here, where we'd have a lieutenant in charge of focusing nothing on the schools and giving resources to the schools and making sure we have an officer present at every school throughout the city. High school to middle school is checking in. But that our MOU was not renewed by the San Francisco Unified School District. So as of now, we don't have that. So we typically do not have, just an officer assigned just to deal with the schools. So I'm just thinking like out of county, like in Solano County where I live, the officers would be at the schools and they would actually have programs where they, after hours, like students can go in there and they would discuss gun violence and how, storage of guns to the young kids. But as of now, we don't have that technically happening here in the city and county. The school board decided they don't want cops there because of the presence of the uniforms and the firearms on their side. So as of now, there's really, we still, as my job at community engagement, I still get in touch with the security for the Unified School District, and he bounced things that happen at the school that, security concerns, like, a firearm is brought on, or anything that like that. But there's really not a solid program where they get to see officers there and are able to interact with them. And, because that just doesn't happen now because that was not renewed by this Unified School District. But it was helpful when we were there because they would see us all the time and they'd have that report and questions could be asked of the officer, and the officer could engage with the students and like, oh no, this is important. If you see this at somebody's house, you leave immediately, call your parents, and they were able to pass that on. But that doesn't happen as of now because we're not on school grounds like we were before.
Okay, well, maybe that's something we can work on. Was there something else you wanted to add, Rachel?
Yeah, just as a parent, I don't live in San Francisco County, even though born and raised in fourth generation, and my heart and soul's here. But San Francisco is challenging just with the political climate and aspects, and that's what makes us so diverse and a wonderful city too, but we still have our challenges. But just with this topic, with your child, so as a mom, right, because when I'm home, I'm a mom, right? When my daughter Gracie went to grammar school, and I remember sitting at her desk in kindergarten, and it was the parents meeting, I said, what is your active shooter policy here? Like, and unfortunately we're in a time where like that's a question as a parent as I have, and it's even more tragic that I have to have this discussion with my child, that this is a possibility in this date and time in this country, and it's happening over and over, right? So it's a conversation I have with my daughter, but I also have the conversation with her grammar school, and then again with her high school, and they do have a plan, and they do have, whether it's lockdown, whether it's get out the back, and so that's a conversation that I've had with her personal schools out of county, and I was glad that they had a plan. I had even brought up a suggestion. I had heard that there's like a sheen that you could put over a glass, so if a glass is broken, it won't shatter and crumble, it'll still stay intact, and it may give the people in the classroom a minute to get out a window or stuff like that. So there are different tactics that the school do. And what's the evacuation policy at the school? Is it shelter in place? Is it get out? And then also like, I know that our department is very aware, like when I was the captain at Mission Station, there's 28 schools just in the Mission District. So my concern is if there's an active shooter on campus, like how are my cops responding? Do they know the layout of the school? Do they know where the lockdowns are? Things of that nature. So it's just being a parent and not being afraid to ask the questions, but just keep in mind, like there's always a time and a place to bring it up. And then as a parent, you have the right to get that answer. Like you have a right as a parent sending your school there to know that they're going to do the best to take care of your child, whether or not they have police on campus or not, right? Whether they do or not, but what is the plan? And as far as I know, the majority of the schools do have a plan, but just because of the times we're in, but you have a right to know that. So don't be dismissed. Just be confident that you have that right. That's it.
Wonderful. Such valuable advice. And was there something else you wanted to? Oh, Tony wanted to speak. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Tony.
again, I don't want to take away from the commander's she made a lot of good points, but I want to give this out to you folks is my kid goes to public school here in San Francisco. So there are times when you have, coffee time out there. I drop them off, and all of a sudden they never knew what I did because I don't wear the uniform normally. So as we're having this conversation, I did exactly what the commander did. I said, "Hey, by the way, what's our little plan here if there's an active shooter?" "Well, what are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, I'm a parent. I want to know." And then they found out what they did. "Oh my God, why aren't you guys here?" I go, "Well, you're the voice. We are parents. We are the voice." And sometimes you need to kind of remind the people that serve us is that, yeah, these are our children. These are our prized possessions that we have, that these are the rising stars of the next generation. Is we want to give them those tools, and we don't want them to be afraid to go to school. So again, the commander hit all the points, is that we as parents should come first and really hold those schools responsible. And if my kids go in that school, I want to know.
Absolutely. Good
You know what, if I
point.
can just add something on that too, real quick.
Sure.
We had a retired Lieutenant Ed Coda. He was working when we did have that MOU with the Unified School District on getting the whole school district plans, the school, how it looks, and having it on our phones. So if something happened at a school, we would immediately know the layout. And then we, at the tactical unit, we would also sometimes with that, since we did have the MOU, we could go to that school and actually train, just to have that basic layout. But, like Tony said, we got to have that coordination, because that is important, because that's where a lot of kids come together at a school. And this is where a lot of incidents happen too. But, here in San Francisco, since that's no longer the policy, that has kind of gone to the wayside. But when we were together strong, I mean, there was things actually happened to make sure if something happened, every cop would be able to pull up the layout and know right where they're at and where to go to. So, I mean, those things were happening, but those have fallen by the wayside here in the city and county from this Unified School District.
Okay. Thank you, Sam. I really appreciate it. And I want to acknowledge that it's 11:58 and that our town hall is to go until noon. I'm personally fine going over. I know Leslie is probably happy to hang out, and Julia, if you can. But I do want to acknowledge there were questions in the chat. And Julia, if you had some closing remarks.
Oh, thank you, Cody. Yeah, I just want to say there are a number of things that we can do with respect to concerns about schools. First of all, we need to acknowledge that the majority of mass shootings have some kind of connection to intimate partner violence. So the more, and that we're talking about 2/3 of mass shootings. So the more we can do to address family violence, to reduce intimate partner violence, to take that seriously, and to ensure people have access to resources, safety planning, and so forth, we are addressing school violence prevention by addressing family violence prevention as well. So, and you can access the domestic violence hotline, the national hotline. I'll put that in the chat as well. If you have any concerns about your safety or the safety of others in your family, and they have tremendous resources, over 100 languages and local resources here in the Bay Area can be accessed that way. Secondly, the superior courts in all counties in California have free self-help centers that provide legal information about the range of options that include some of the most comprehensive tools in the country for reducing risk around access to firearms. You've probably heard of so-called red flag laws, the gun violence restraining order. That's the only civil restraining order that doesn't include protected parties, but it focuses entirely on firearms and ammunition access, both currently owned and anything that would be purchased in the future while the order is in place. But we also have the domestic violence restraining orders, workplace violence prevention orders, and school violence prevention orders, as well as civil harassment orders to deal with strangers, neighbors, and stalking. So we have, as I said at the top of the hour, some of the most comprehensive firearms violence prevention laws. All those orders include prohibitions in terms of access to firearms and ammunition. Those policies save lives. So if you need assistance, reach out to attorneys, reach out to the self-help center, contact the domestic violence prevention hotline. Call the suicide prevention number 988. And there are resources, and we have those in San Francisco, and the schools are generally aware of those, and are doing a tremendous amount, both in the independent school community and in the public school world, to ensure that they're addressing safety as effectively as possible. And I'd be happy to talk more about that. I know we're at the end of the hour, but thank you so much to everyone, and especially thank you to all of you who are dealing with this on the front lines through SFPD work. So really appreciate the opportunity to be in dialogue with you, and to all of you who are doing this every day in your own way out there in the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. Thank you to our amazing panelists and everyone who joined this call today. You're free to go. It's 12 noon, but I want to make sure everyone's has their questions answered. So if you want to raise your hand, if you have something you didn't type in the chat that you'd like to have answered or addressed, please feel free to do that now, and we're happy to answer your questions.
I'm just speaking for myself, Tony Flores. I'll be here for a little bit longer to facilitate any questions that you might have. I'm waiting for my partner to get out of court too, so I can facilitate this for a little bit longer.
Thank you, Tony. I appreciate that so much. I scanned the chat and I feel like we got everyone's questions pretty much answered. And nobody's raising their hand.
There was
So
one
Leslie-
thing I
Oh yeah.
was interesting. Commander Moran, you had told me about when there's an active shooter, what you should do. Like, do you stay in your place? Do you run? I don't know if you have any advice for us, or if that's something you're at liberty to share, but what happens if you're, because nowadays with everything going on, active shooters not only in schools, they're in every single place that we can even imagine. So do you have any advice for us? Like, we used to know duck and cover, but what do we do in an active shooter? And I don't know if there's education for parents on that. So
Yeah, well, you have to take me with a grain of salt, right? So I've been doing this job since I was a baby, right? So every time I go into a restaurant, right, I sit with my back to the wall and I know where the exits are. And that's just like an automatic for me, right? A situational awareness in case I run into somebody that is in the criminal element, because I worked undercover for like numerous years buying drugs. So what happens if I come into confrontation with them, right? Or they're there, like, what are my avenues? And when I'm off duty, I don't like to carry a firearm. I like to be a soccer mom. But like in today's society, like, it's just violent, right? And you never know when that violence is going to fall on your lap, and I always pray that it'll be when I'm working and not at home with my family or in my neighborhood, right? But one of the things there's not like an answer to that really, but it's just be aware who you're with, where you're at, and what is going on, right? So that's very important. Just your self-awareness. And one of the things that I wanted to express to the people listening to this as parents and just personal safety is, we all have a sixth sense, and if that gets triggered, listen to it. There's a reason like why your hackles went up, and you may never ever know like why, but just listen to it. If you get a sixth sense about a parent who you think is just giving you like kind of like the wrong vibe about if you're having a conversation regarding firearms or drugs, listen to it. Even if you can't pinpoint it, like if you don't get a good vibe, there's a reason. So just listen to your sixth sense as a parent. And my advice to everyone is just be situationally aware of where you're at. Like the tragic mass shooting that happened in Las Vegas, I had friends there. One of my friends lost his wife. My other friends' 2 adult daughters were there. They were covered in blood because they were right next to people who got, who were murdered by the active shooter. So it's very sad of the times we're in. I would advise everybody to continue to live your life, but just be aware. Just try to be aware. And if something doesn't feel right, listen to your intuition, and don't be sorry for not changing like your behavior or what you're doing. Be like, thank God I listened to myself. That would probably be like my best advice.
thank you. I think that's really helpful.
And I can just add on to that real quick. Our tactical unit does teach a workplace violence and active shooter to some of the corporations and businesses here in the city. So they do that. That may be possible depending on if you can get a large group together, they could definitely do that. And, they got a new captain out there now. So that's maybe something they might be able to do.
Yeah,
if
great.
There's a group interested in that.
Fantastic. Thank you for bringing that up. Appreciate
Yeah.
that. Les, was there anything else you wanted to add?
No, I'm
someone's raising their hand. Hold on. Was that Mick? Where are you?
Oh, hi there.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks for hosting all this. Hi, everyone. My name is Mick Del Rosario. I work in Supervisor Catherine Stephanie's office. I just want to give our gratitude and thanks to you all, especially to Leslie, Pierce's Pledge, the board members, Cody, yourself, Julia, Joy, Sarah, and also SFPD for being a part of this town hall. It definitely means a lot to the supervisor that this discussion is happening. And definitely, being supportive of the organization and the mission and all the work that you all are doing. So, thank you.
Thank you so
And-
much, Mick. We really appreciate you being here and giving your kind words.
Definitely. And one question I'm curious, it's great that we have this town hall. Do you foresee potential future resources, whether it's like a quick one pager or like something that would be easily distributable to, to residents in terms of like the resources and whatnot? And this could also potentially be an, SFPD question as well. And, thank you to Commander Moran and Acting Captain Chris and Spec Flores and Sergeant Faye for being here as well.
Yeah, I absolutely reiterate that again, how grateful we are for the presence of these amazing police officers. And yeah, I think we could definitely summarize today's meeting in a one sheet that can be widely distributed. Absolutely.
Yeah,
We would love to put that together, and maybe we could get your email address and get that over to you once we have that completed and talk about how we can distribute it.
definitely. And, something to spread far and wide to not only in District 2, but, potentially increasing the wide net for people to see this information.
And if I could
Awesome.
just add, we have these available in California. These are brochures that I developed with Giffords on how to get help when you're concerned about someone in your life who has access to firearms and may be a danger to themselves or others. It's in English, Spanish, and simplified Chinese characters. And it's just you can see the size of it, a small brochure, pocket size that many law enforcement courts, schools, and I'd just say, the general public should have access to. So if you're interested in that, you can email me and we can get anyone copies of these brochures. And it includes, both legal remedies, the hotlines I mentioned, and remedies that might include counseling and support as alternatives for folks who may not be interested or a good fit for going through the criminal or civil legal process. So we want to provide as many different options because unfortunately, gun violence is diverse in the way it's perpetrated and experienced. And we're simultaneously trying to deal with unintentional shootings, suicide, domestic violence, potential mass violence, and community violence. Too many young people in San Francisco and our surrounding counties are living with what we think about as everyday gun violence in the community, hearing bullets, losing way too many people in their families and in the community to community violence as well. So we have a number of different issues that we're trying to contend with. But if folks are interested in that, let me know.
Fantastic. Yeah, definitely. Let's connect. Let me put my email address on the chat for folks to reach out if anyone, in the audience has any questions, to reach out to the office. Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you again for your time and your input, your experience, and thanks for sharing wholeheartedly as a parent and as a police officer. And of course, Julia and Cody, amazing. And everybody else that joined, thank you so much for showing up. It means a whole lot. And hopefully we can start to really have these serious conversations and start to change a culture. And like Commander Moran said, right? Make this a normal thing so that everybody can be a little bit more protected.
Well,
Great.
thank you very much. Again, we always learn from each other, and that's always the takeaway, not only as a parent, but what we do daily. Thank you again, Leslie, and thank you, Cody, and everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much. I hope you all have a wonderful, safe, and happy Thursday. See you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Take
you.
care.